She was only 8 years old, with a shy smile and big, hopeful eyes. But instead of growing up to chase her dreams, her small body was found buried in a shallow grave, just steps from the house she called home. The chickens nearby clucked indifferently, unaware they were pecking at earth that hit a child's final moments. Her name was Engeline. Her case shattered Indonesia, not just because of its brutality, but because of the painful truth it revealed. Sometimes, the most monstrous crimes happen behind closed doors, where no one's looking. And the ones trusted to love us can be the ones to destroy us. But how did it come to this? In Denpasar, Bali, in early 2015, Engeline's disappearance wasn't immediately treated as a tragedy. It was just a child who wandered off, they said. Runaways happen all the time. But Engeline wasn't a runaway. She was adopted, quiet, and deeply afraid of something she never spoke of. Her adoptive mother, Margaret, claimed she had left home after a fight. Authorities took the explanation at face value. But as hours turned to days, then weeks, a chilling silence began to settle over the community. Something didn't add up. Why weren't there any real search efforts? Why did her adoptive mother seem unmoved? When Engeline's biological mother, Hamida, arrived in Bali to demand answers, the atmosphere shifted. Hamida wasn't buying Margret's story. The two had fought in court years earlier, with Margret eventually adopting Engeline and cutting off all contact. But Hamida couldn't shake the feeling, the kind that only a mother knows, that something terrible had happened to her daughter. She begged police to dig deeper. Still, they hesitated. Margret was seen as respectable, an older, educated woman who ran a small charity. To question her meant accusing a mother of murdering her child. Who could believe that? But rumors started to spread. Neighbors whispered of shouting at night, of Engeline being forced to work, sweeping, cooking, cleaning, like a servant instead of a child. One visitor said she once saw Engeline sitting outside with chickens while the family dined inside. Another recalled seeing bruises on the girl's arms, yet no one stepped in. After all, it wasn't their business until it was too late. On June 10th, 2015, 25 days after Engeline was last seen, police were called back to the house. This time they brought shovels. A tip-off had changed everything. They dug near the chicken coop, and there, wrapped in dirty cloth and buried under a thin layer of soil, they found her. She had been beaten, strangled, and discarded like trash. Her body was still wearing the same clothes she was last seen in. The country erupted in grief and fury. Candlelight vigils, social media outrage, and cries for justice filled the air. But beneath the emotional wave, one question remained unanswered. Who really killed Engeline? At first, all eyes turned to Margaret. But then came the confession. Not from her, but from a man named Agus Tay, a domestic helper who had worked in the house. Agus told police that he had killed Engeline in a fit of rage after an argument. He even reenacted the crime. It seemed the case was closed. But something didn't feel right. Forensics showed that Engeline had suffered repeated abuse before her death, and not just physical. Marks on her body suggested long-term trauma. And Agus? He had no clear motive, no prior history of violence. Most chilling of all, the evidence hinted that the girl had likely died hours before Agus even arrived at the house that day. Still, Agus's confession stood until he changed his story. He said he was coerced, that Margaret had ordered him to take the blame, that she had promised to pay his family and protect him. Suddenly, everything the public thought they knew collapsed. The investigation reopened. This time, forensic psychologists, child welfare advocates, and even the national police chief got involved. Testimonies poured in. Stories of how Margaret treated Engeline with cold cruelty. How neighbors had heard screams. How friends had reported neglect, but were dismissed. And how Marguerite had continued to live in the house, over the very spot where Engeline's body lay, for nearly a month. In December 2015, the court handed down its verdict. Marguerite was found guilty of murder and sentenced to 12 years in prison. Agus was also found guilty, but as an accessory. For many Indonesians, the sentence felt too light. 12 years for taking a child's life, for weeks of silent torture. But the law had spoken, and Engeline's story had, finally, reached its conclusion. Or had it? Years have passed since Engeline's death, but the pain still lingers. Her face, innocent, smiling, has become a symbol for child protection movements across Indonesia. Billboards bear her name. Campaigns demand better systems to monitor adopted children. But deep down, the nation still wrestles with guilt. Why was no one there to save her? Why did the system fail so completely? Her room remains untouched in her biological mother's home, a shrine to the girl who never got to grow up. Hamida visits her grave often, placing flowers and softly humming lullabies. Sometimes, she talks to her daughter, asking if she's finally at peace, and in the silence, she waits for a sign, for a future where no child will ever end up buried beside a chicken coop again. But as long as silence and apathy continue to exist, Engeline's story may repeat itself, somewhere, in another home, behind another locked door.